Hello everyone. Oh gosh, every time I start talking, I always get that. Whenever I start, it's stupid. Hello everyone. I should just start talking like that generally. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of For What It's Nerd. We are back again, live once again. We're doing a lot of these more frequently at the moment. I'm quite liking it. I like having a little bit of a live For What It's Nerd episode every so often. Today we're here to talk about the movie that I just finished watching just about an hour ago, not even an hour ago yet, which is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. A very good movie, I've got to say. I might have the most recent of recency biases by saying that, but no, I did very much enjoy the movie. I think it's a very good movie. There's a lot to discuss in it. I probably won't hit it all. I'm not the most clued in on all Spider-Man content, as we all know. I'm not a huge Spidey fan by nature. He says with Spider-Man on his bookcase. Well, not Spider-Man himself, but Spider-Man comics. But what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, is that I'm not the biggest aficionado on Spider-Man, but still there's a lot to say about this movie. There's a lot to enjoy about this movie. What we'll start with is that this movie, to me, I don't know if other people felt the same way, but this movie is about expectation and what is expected of you, what is expected to happen to you, where your life is expected to go, and the desire to move off of that path, so to speak. That's what it feels like this movie is about. It's about destiny and predestined events and ideas and what your life will become as viewed by the people around you, and your idea of where you want to be and the desire to break away from the expectations surrounding you. But the counter to that is still doing it in a way that is within your held beliefs from that starting point that those other people have given you. And obviously this is a bit of a meta commentary as well, because this is talking about this below, underneath, it's talking about the idea that this is Miles' story. This is not a Peter Parker story. This is not, for the intents of the movies, it's not the Miguel O'Hara story. It's not Miles' parents' story. It's his story. He says that. And it's about how he decides he wants to do things. And I think that's a very important point to make, towards fans of Spider-Man as well, because a lot of people, and we know this comes because of negative tendencies regarding the idea that there can only be one Spider-Man and it's Peter Parker, and any other Spider-Man, especially a Spider-Man of color or otherwise inclined, you know, as regards their sexuality and stuff like that, is not accepted. Which we all know Stan Lee did not create the character with that in mind. The biggest idea he ever wanted with Spider-Man was to make it so that he can be anyone. That's probably why we have more spider characters than any other type of, you know, variant of a character in any sort of comic ever. You know, because Spider-Man is meant to be everyone. He is the everyman, and I can appreciate that, regardless of the fact that I'm not a huge Spidey fan. But that's the important lesson to come out of this movie, is that Miles is breaking stereotype. He breaks what is expected of him. He breaks the ideas of what should happen to him, and you go from there, right? That's the premise. That's the idea, right? Yes, it's a multiverse story. Yes, it's got all these cool cameos, and we'll get to that. Obviously, we'll discuss that as well. It's got all these cool pieces. It's got all this great motion. It's got all this great you know, it's a brilliant movie stylistically and everything. But the heart of this movie is relatively simple. It's, I am my own person. Yes, I might be a spider person. Yes, you might feel like you have some kind of like impression of what I should end up being, but actually I'm not that, and you can't make me that. And so everything spins out of that, essentially. But this movie, don't get me wrong, this movie is very hard for some people. Will be very difficult. The film blew me away completely and utterly. Yeah, I know it was. That's how I was sat there. I actually got very emotional very quickly in this movie. I think this movie had a lot that resonates with people. But I do think this movie, I think if you're not ready for that fast-pacedness, which I don't think is a word, but it is now. If you're not ready for that, if you're not typically used to the animation style, this is not the one to come in on. That, like, for example, I was with others when I went to cinema today, and they don't typically watch a lot of animation, and especially they haven't watched Into the Spider-Verse. This is a movie that is specifically predetermined on having watched Into the Spider-Verse and to understand comic book nature, right? If you don't know that, I don't think you will like this movie. And that's okay, that's fine. But I think that's kind of the thing with it. Everything I could expect above and beyond, the ups and downs of the characters and feelings, the stellar and breathtaking animation, everything I could expect above and beyond. I will say the animation, I think, was phenomenal. I was thinking at parts, how did they manage to make this all feel believable still within, you know, you have animation upon animation upon animation, some drawn, some 2D, some 3D, some computer generated, some more like drawn stuff. Like, for example, the first fight in the movie, I'll try not to go too much into detail, but this vulture in the beginning of the movie is a drawn vulture, essentially. Like, phenomenal. Like, bellissimo. Brilliant. Phenomenal. And one thing I really liked as well is the fact that this movie really decided, hey, and I actually spoke to you about this, Finn. This was like the one comment I made thus far on the movie, outside of when I've been on this stream thus far. The ending gave me utter chills. We will get to the ending, but we're kind of going through bit by bit. But the one thing I think was really important about this one is letting Peter Parker, the message that I said about earlier, that the fact that Miles is his own person, this should be him deciding his fate. The fact that they allowed Peter Parker to take a backseat in this, because as well, the Peter that we have, the main Peter that we have in this movie, isn't your typical Peter, right? Because he's a Peter that's he's from the first movie, first of all, but he's not the prime Peter. He's not Peter Prime, so to speak. So to have Peter really be stepped back from this movie, even in regards to the fact that this Peter isn't our typical Peter, so to speak, is the best thing this movie could have done, because it lets all these other characters breathe. I mean, for example, there's a sequence where they're in Mumbattan, and again, that's not a spoiler because that was in the trailers. But and you have these characters who you have a team that is 3 people of color and a female Spider-Man, a spider character. Sorry, and that's like really important. The fact that actually this cast for the majority is people of color, it resonates with that point again that not everything needs to be Peter Parker, not everything needs to be the white everyman, so to speak. And that these characters were actually very, very interesting. Like, I think all of them had humor to tell, all of them had their role to play. Even the fact that there was little arcs that weren't even explained on screen. For example, I again, try not to go into too much detail here, but Hobby, Spider-Punk, we all knew Spider-Punk was going to be in the movie, but Spider-Punk, he plays a very small role in the film overall, in reality. But he goes from what is an off-screen antagonist, so to speak, in his first mention, to at the end, really, he was the reason Miles got out of a situation that he was in. And if Miles hadn't got out of that situation, that was Endgame. And like, it was only told through small pieces of dialogue and like the animation, right? It was told through an implicit like movement of character, and fantastic. Yeah, you think Spider-Man was a rival to Miles, but he's basically the only man on his side. In that moment, he is the only person who understands what he is going through. And it was amazing. One thing I will say as well is I think it was very brave in this movie for them to go, hey, you know what? Because a lot of people thought if we ever deal with characters who may be outside of the animated world, how are we going to deal with them? And a lot of people thought it might be a thing where, oh, you step into the animated world, you become animated. And I won't spoil them because they're very interesting, and I'd really ask anyone who's in chat to try and let's curb around things, let's discuss things as kind of tactfully as we can. But there are certain parts of this movie that reference the movie world, let's say, as regards the live action stuff, and I think the way they did it was very, very intelligent and very, very sensible, because first of all, some of them use stock footage, and that's all I'll say in regards to that, which I think is a very good idea. I think the way they did it allows it to still breathe and doesn't feel like it's taking over the story, but at the same time lets you know that people are thinking about this, that it's there, it's at the forefront of these conversations. And at the same time, when they did do some live action segments in the movie that were new, they gave something. They said something about because the first one is given up as a kind of comedic a gag, but it was poignant for the villain. So even though it was a gag, and yes, it was quite funny actually, and admittedly I loved it, but it was set up as an important moment for the villain, because the villain just realizes what he's capable of. And I'll say no more than that again, but yeah. And so, and then the other one, yes, it was kind of a fun cameo thing, but it actually is very important for where we find some of the other stuff that we've been wondering about in certain other movies for a little bit. So that's really fun and interesting. I like the way they handled the alternate things outside of animation, so to speak, because, you know, it could have been not easy, but it could have been a very safe maneuver to just basically go, hey, this isn't actually animation in world, but actually it is. You know, that is how they look. It's not like, because you watch certain movies, for example, like animation of, I don't know, I can't even think of something right now, but the Clone Wars, for example, Clone Wars is not like, those characters don't exist as animation or as they are in reality. That's why you have these discourses around, for example, oh, well, Ahsoka doesn't look how she looked like in Rebels or Clone Wars or whatever, because you're dealing with two mediums in the same universe, right? But in this one, they're saying actually, all these, that's them, that's their universe, and that's actually pretty cool. Actually, I think it's a really what it does is it solidifies everything we've seen in universe so far and makes it understandable that you can see someone and you can perceive almost which universe they're from, which is a great on-screen cue as well, obviously. But that is something that they actually play with at the end of the movie, and this is, Finn, I think you were kind of alluding to this before. The end of the movie plays with this expectation that every dimension, generally speaking, has a sort of different design, right? But the reality is, with a multiverse, a Spider-Verse, if you will, you can have same universes that look very, very similar to the original or to the other one or whatever. And that's what they play with at the end of this movie. And if you're, it's not like a super like, it's not like a super like trippy like flip. Like you can understand it if you're following the story of this movie. You get it, and you're like, oh, like very quickly. But if you're not paying attention, that can come across and be like, oh shit, because you don't realize just how much that's important to what's happening. Because it's not only the fact that essentially Miles has some important information he needs to give out, and he gives it out, and he gives it out at the moment that it doesn't matter. And that was like, you finally got to this point of being able to say this thing, and you can't say it. This is not how you envisioned it because it went wrong. And then from there, he tries and does it again. This time it is heard, it is understood, but by people who are irreverent to the fact that he comes from another world. And so there's a lot of playing around with ideas and playing around with the same idea as like a mirror and then a dark mirror, so to speak. Miguel has this sort of very similar thing in his backstory. The other villain, so to speak, of the piece. Miguel has this other idea of what things should be like, what things are like. He's already seen, he is the dark mirror of another version of him, so to speak. And so there's a lot going on in these characters. And so what I'm trying to say is, I suppose, is that Miguel is the dark mirror to the other version of him, but he's come past that on the negative side. Miles now has a moment where he is facing his dark mirror. And again, I'm trying to like leave this as wide open as possible to not give everyone, I'm not trying to spoil anything for anyone here as much as I can. But they're also the mirrors for each other. That Miguel is also Miles's dark mirror, in a sense. And so there's a lot of parallel and juxtaposition, and there's a lot going on in this. I think that's why this piece is very, very, you've got to be careful with it, because it's something that like you need to think about and really start to grasp. And that's why I think a lot of people just won't get this movie, especially considering like the first one. I feel like Into the Spider-Verse, and don't get me wrong, it's still a great movie, but I feel like Into the Spider-Verse explained it you a lot more. I feel like this movie lets you, oh, I hit the mic, brilliant, great podcast. I can do a podcast, I promise. The meta take on Spider-Man's misery being written to every universe is kind of tragic. Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of like, it's taking everything we know about Spider-Man and trying to flip it on its head in a very poignant way, right? But it's also saying, and I think this is very important, I think this is where characters like the Peter, is it Peter B. Parker? Is that the one? I forget. But, Peter and Gwen are facing, oh, sorry, not Peter and Gwen, Peter and Jessica Peter B. Parker. I think they're facing the idea that we are made better people through these things. You will come out of this stronger at the end of it because they've already been through it. They can't know, and this is what Miles sort of argues in the movie, is that you can't know what you would do if you had known this beforehand. Miles is the only one who knows this beforehand. And in fact, when Gwen thinks about it, she doesn't do anything about it in that moment per se, but there's a later moment in the movie when she realizes that her own tragedy has been averted. And she is relieved. She was too scared to act on it, perhaps, but for that moment, her tragedy is not happening, so to speak. And so she is relieved by that fact. So these people are not as willing as they like to admit, to just go with the flow. It's kind of that they actually don't realize what Miles is going through, even though they've been through it themselves before. And it's almost like it feels like these adults that are surrounding Miles, and this is the thing as well, a lot of these are adults, they're talking about kids versus adults. A lot of these adults think we have suffered generationally, so you should suffer too. On a subconscious level, right? And I know this is taking this to the next extreme, but that's what it sort of feels like. It feels like, well, we went through this, so why shouldn't you go through this? And that's a very important point, I think, for society as a whole to kind of discuss. But that's like getting really, really meta, and we'll kind of rein it back in. But that's something that's there in the movie. That's like something that's on the forefront of the movie. I mean, you need only look so far as like the beginning of the movie when they're discussing Miles going on to do greater things, and he talks to his dad, and his dad says, me and your uncle were going to do this thing, and then life happens. Life is an adventure. But the way he says that is kind of like, we'll just accept the path you're on. Accept what's going to happen to you because that's what happened to me. And it's like, is that really what you want? And so I think in a microcosm, the movie is repeatedly saying, you're stuck in this, you're stuck in this, you're stuck in this, you can't change anything, you can't do anything about your situation. Don't do anything about your situation. But Miles as a character is the one to say, actually, I'm going to break out of this. I don't need to be stuck to this web that you're all stuck in, so to speak, which I know is a very big, it's used in the movie sort of, but I don't need to be stuck in that, and so I won't be. And so I was very pleased with the movie. I think that the movie does a lot of great things. Never mind, let's talk about like cameos. The amount of guts it takes to rip the shit out of yourself for ever having a Tyrannosaurus Rex, Spider-Man, ever having, all these sorts of things. The fact that they take Ben Reilly, for example, Scarlet Spider, and they make a really a funny joke, like they make humor out of it, right? But like without hurting the character too much. I feel like it was just that, like, how do I put it? It felt like the right amount of joking about that kind of broodingness, right? It's saying that, yeah, sometimes not Spider-Man, but Spider people can be broody, but let's kind of play with that. Let's have a little bit of fun with that. And so there's like that, and then I think actually I am pleased that they took a different take on Jessica Drew. I know a lot of people weren't happy with that. I feel like I think that's it was actually the right move, because this Jessica could never have been, the once Hydra agent from the UK who, she couldn't have been that, because that's not where Marvel and Sony are at in their sort of relationship, so to speak. So I think having a character who is essentially unique who essentially just has the name Jessica Drew, but isn't Jessica Drew, is a lot better of a... Because if you can't do it well, you might as well do something else, right? So I think I was very happy with that. I think Miguel, personally, this is my little opinion, I feel like I could have done with a little... I think for Miguel, if you had seen... Do you know how at the beginning of the movie, so for those who have watched it, Finn probably, and a few others, basically at the beginning of the movies is like a short movie, so to speak, of Gwen, basically. I won't say more than that, but there was a short movie of Gwen. I feel like we could have also done with like 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not saying to take off anywhere else in the movie, because I think the movie is like a perfect runtime. But like, I think I could have done with 5 or 10 minutes being shown what happened to Miguel instead of being told it. But that's like a gripe on the fact that I feel like Miguel at points was slightly one-dimensional. And I feel like if we'd seen his backstory as opposed to hearing it, that would have been better. But I say that with like the biggest like disclaimer of this is a nitpick, because like how do I put it? I think the movie, like, from start to finish just went and it did it right, and there was no filler. Every moment had an emotional need for pause, or was tension building, or had something to say. Like, there was nothing, no part of this movie that was like, this scene just drew out. This scene was too long. There was nothing like that. Yeah, I can't, that's what I kind of mean. I mean, don't get it wrong, yeah, you could definitely see that in the next movie and have it start out with a Miguel flashback, so to say, or something like that. Because obviously, this movie, in case anyone is unsure, and I'm sorry, I don't think this is a spoiler, this movie ends on a cliffhanger. Because there's another movie coming out next year. I think everyone knows that by this point, so gotta wait for Beyond the Spider-Verse to finish the story. But I do think that would have been my like one little nitpick if I was to mark something in the corner. Because I think oppositely, they did a really good job with Spot. I think Spot actually has the fact that they rooted Spot in, and yes, it was sort of retconny, but in a good way, right? It's that kind of retcon that adds. So when you go back and watch Into the Spider-Verse, you'll feel like you have more of a, like, it will more seamlessly flow into Across the Spider-Verse, so to speak. Because the thing is, right, this is a trilogy of movies, sure, but the 2 and 3 are intended with each other, whereas 1 was kind of like, we'll do this thing, if it does well, we'll do a sequel, like they do with a lot of movies. So having 2 be then purpose built to fit into 1 in the same way is actually very important, because this isn't like, I mean, it's a bad example because Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker knew each movie was coming and then didn't do it anyway. But it's not like that. It's not like they knew that they were doing 3. I don't think they knew that relatively until afterwards. Yeah, exactly, Finn. That's what I mean. So, like, when you're making the 2 movies at the same time, you know what you're doing with each one, right? But turn Spot from a C-list spider villain to such a massive nemesis. But I mean, that's shown in the dialogue, right? That's shown in the way Spot. Even the voice acting for Spot was so brilliant, to where it was like nonchalant, and then it would go into this really sinister kind of like diatribe. But what it felt like to me, and I feel like it was a better portrayal of what Electro was meant to be to Garfield, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, right? Like, not exactly the same, but it's a sort of similar vibe, right? It's like hey, like he almost wanted to be. I feel like Spot on some level would have been almost okay with just being like like this villain that Spidey did fight every week, so to speak. That Miles did fight every week, so to speak. But like, because Miles was sort of rejecting him, that's why he becomes a threat, right? I feel like that's kind of the implication that I got, that Miles escalated it by essentially, like, it's funny because this is what happens with a lot of like Spidey villains, right? That they almost crave the connection that they get through Spider-Man to either the city or, you know, the like just the superhero-esque lifestyle. So it's weird because Spider-Man and a lot of his villains have this connection. They have either this humor or they have this kind of disrespect, but with like an antagonized aspect to that. And so, yeah, I think you've got a real case for. I've lost my train of thought, but you know what I'm saying. There's this sense of like that. I've lost my train of thought. I'm not even going to pretend I can carry on the conversation because I've totally forgot what I was saying. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, I really enjoyed Spot. I think Spot's really good. That's where we were at, sort of. But Spot was a very, very good villain. Blood's train of thought got derailed. I was out of there. I totally forgot. And then obviously now we have this pseudo villain at the end, which I don't think. Now, don't get me wrong. It could be that this goes totally crazy because the next movie I couldn't even begin to imagine what happens in the next movie. Apart from my predictions, and then I'll go back to a few other things I want to touch on quick if I remember. My predictions are: I think in the next movie you see Madam Web. Do you think that, Finn? Do you think that's something that we could see in the next one? I think that's like kind of very much there with the kind of. Probably not. Do you think not? It's the web of destiny and fate, though, right? I think that's like. I think it's too late for Madam Web. I don't think so. I think she can definitely show up in the next one. I think this can be a thing that's like even hot. Like she'll be like the somehow Palpatine returned of Rise of Skywalker. Maybe I don't know. I think I'm gonna go out on a limb. Obviously, we're under a year away, but I'm still gonna say it now. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I think Madam Web will show up in the next one. I don't know about which. I don't know how, because the thing is, at this point, not many other players are going to come to the table. Really speaking, because quite frankly, if you did bring more of this, there's already a lot of characters in play. I remember people thinking Superior Spider-Man would then be the main villain. I'm not. I've got to be honest. I'm gonna. Oh, you mean that's like Doc Ock, right? That's like Doc Ock when he's Spider-Man. Is that the right one? I'm trying to rack my brains. Doc Ock is Spidey. Yeah. Which would be a good. But the thing is, that would be a very interesting thing because if you were playing around with it, you would do it with. I was trying in front of the comic. I did hear about that. Yes, which is a very poignant. Not poignant. A very well-timed thing, right? But I would like to see it if they were to do it. Wouldn't it be cool if it was like a little bit of a play on that with oh, what's her name? Right, Octavia? No, it's not Octavia, is it? You know, things have gotten bad for Spidey comics when we're praising the Return of the Dan Slott. But yeah, but like the newest comics being really bad, I'm hearing. That's a totally different tangent, but that's what I've heard. But yeah, so I think this movie did a lot of things right. I think the animation was phenomenal from the start. One thing I do want to say, though, and this is important because a lot of people have mentioned this, the sound mixing at certain points, no. Especially right at the beginning. Like, Gwen's speech at the beginning of the movie was fucked. Like, you couldn't hear a fucking word of it. Well, you could hear it, but you had to strain. You had to be very much like, hello, what are you saying? And certain parts of the rest of the movie was intentional. Do you think? Even if it was intentional, bad choice. If it was intentional, bad choice, because I hated it. Dialogue is the most important part of the movie, in my opinion. You know, we know how bad dialogue goes in the movie. Looking at you, George Lucas, love you, but like, damn. The drums representing Gwen trying to shut out a guilt and pain. Okay, yeah, but like, I think don't get me wrong, there's definitely a room for showing things instead of telling things. And I agree with that, and that's why I was saying about Miguel the way I was. But I think in the instance where you start to use sound to if it's like a brief moment of that, but if that's a continued thing, it's somewhat annoying. Because like all you want to do is listen to the movie. You want to learn what the movie's saying. But I can see what you mean as it being a stylistic choice, which okay, fair enough. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I like that as like a tool. At least not like in that way. If someone's talking and then the point is that someone's trying to talk over them or trying to block them out by starting music or something, that's fine. But as like a medium that like is employed by sort of the narrator, so to speak, if that were the word, I don't like that myself. But yeah, so I think, Finn, what you were saying, I think I maybe have to agree on this one, is that it's your favorite Spider-Man movie, mate. I think I have to agree. I've been thinking about it for like whilst I've been talking about this, and most of the Spider-Man movies in general, I don't really jive with that much because I'm not a big Spidey fan anyway, especially not a Peter Parker fan. So like, I feel like Miles would always be further up there anyway. But I do think this is probably, at least as so far as when I'm recording this, obviously this is, like I say, as recent as recency bias can get. But if it were like, but I think at this moment, yeah, I do think that is my favorite Spider-Man movie. Also I want to say that I think that scene, I also think that it was really good that they focused on, even though the peril is around Miles's relationship with his dad, I think I was very happy that they focused on Miles's relationship with his mother, because I think that's not a relationship that's often nurtured in film, if that makes sense. I think it's usually like, oh, the father and his son and the daughter and her mother. I think the other type of relationships are usually left aside. And I feel like that scene where they were in, I think it was a water tower, and him and his mother were talking. That was actually, I think, the most poignant scene in the movie, for me at least. But I feel like it was a very poignant scene, a very important scene, and it talks to a lot of people about it. That scene could be taken out and put in so many different movies and still resonate with people on so many different levels. I was very, very excited about that. That one got me. I was sobbing. I've got to admit. Also, during Surprise, the film caught me off guard with how funny it could be sometimes. I think what really was the funniest part of this movie is the chase with 1967 Spider-Man showing up was a good shit. Oh, sorry. Oh, gosh, I'm dying. You killed me, Finn. Sorry, guys, I've been poorly. I think the chase sequences were just amazing. Like, there's so much you could take in. I think pretty much everything since they got to, is it Nueva York, all the way up to when Peter goes, when Miles goes back to his Earth. Peralta's death. Yeah, exactly. I think you could watch that whole segment about 10 times and still see something new. That's how like crazy that is. That's how much there is there. But yeah, I think this movie is really good. I think it's got a lot going for it. I would probably watch that again. It's not only for the fact that there's lots of stuff that pops up on screen at certain points that you just kind of like need to be there for and alert for. I will also say that this movie, I think, the reason it's humor, going back to what you're saying about humor, Finn, is that the humor of this movie actually deals a lot with ignorance. I know that sounds very weird to say, but it's that thing of like, okay, this is a thing. Let's discuss that. Let's kind of like pick that apart and why you think that's the way it is, and actually no, it can't be that way, and shut up, idiots. And like, especially in the Mumbattan segment, I think the Mumbattan jokes were all built on the like, let's break down these ideas of what that would be like. Which was really good, and a really good way of like not only making a lighthearted and very strong segment of the movie, but also create something fresh and very positively representative of people who aren't, people of color who aren't represented in movies sometimes the way they should be. And that was it was brilliant. The humor was on point, no breaking serious moments or derailing the job. That's the other thing, yeah. Sometimes it was like, okay, yeah, it'll be like and sometimes it was sort of off screen as well. I remember one where Spot is in Mountbatten, and I'll say it no more than that. But a hobby says something, and he just says, "Actually, I'm joking." But it was like he wasn't even seen at that point, because like the dialogue in this movie is all about pace, right? It's all about like, hey, we'll do something else. We'll still be talking about this one thing whilst we pivot to the next thing. We're focusing on one thing, but let's give you a little bit of something else to hear and digest at the same time. That was probably my biggest issue with Guardians 3. You get that too often. I think the way the Guardians are, sometimes they stop and they start because the bit becomes too big. And that's not a bad thing, but I do agree with what you're saying in general. Also, I think Miguel's brief appearance in ITSV being so different from Across makes sense with how much his backstory hit. Yeah, true. Yeah, I didn't think of it like that, but you are correct. Yes. Yeah. But I think that's sort of where I want to end this. I don't like the idea of, I think if you're having a review, it should really be sort of a third of what the movie is. You know, if you're talking for even what becomes to be half of a movie, you might as well just tell someone to go and watch the movie and make their own decision and discuss it amongst friends afterward. So I am going to sort of leave it there, guys. I think I've discussed a lot of the stuff around the movie. There's stuff that I won't remember and won't come to mind straight away, but you know, that's what shorts are for, right? But other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for discussing Across the Spider-Verse. I would say to most people, go and watch this. I think it's a solid, I would say 9. I would say 9 for me, and the reason I don't give it the 10 is because, again, Spider-Fan. Like, if this was like another hero, maybe I'd be like, whoa, yeah, but like that wouldn't happen. This movie wouldn't be made with the hero. But it's 9 for me, but that's only because I'm not a huge Spider-Fan. If it were a character that was obsessed with, I think it would have been a 10 movie. But with all that said, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. If you want more from me, those live, just so you're aware, I will be streaming on Peralta's Place, my gaming channel, very shortly in, say, at 8:30. So it's quarter to 8 now, 8:30. So about 45 minutes from now, if you guys want to tune in for that. If you're watching on demand and you didn't know I had a gaming channel, check it out. Peralta's Place. That's PERALTAS apostrophe S, should I say, Place. PLACE. If you guys want to check that out, Blood's downloading his next game. What are you on about? Embarrassing. Thank you guys so much for watching, so much for listening, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.